Hello, I'm Charles Horn, and welcome to my Human Rights Report Card on Papua New Guinea. As you can see in the map, Papua New Guinea is in fact an island in Southeast Asia. It is directly above, if you look at a big map, over Australia, considered part of Oceania, which creates a significant relation between the two that we'll explore a little later. You can also see the current human rights grade that I gave Papua New Guinea, which is a C. We'll delve into some of the specifics of the human rights situation in Papua New Guinea later and the reasons as to why I arrived at that grade. First, I want to delve into facts and figures and isolate a couple that will set the stage for the rest of the presentation. The first is languages. As you can see, some 839 indigenous languages are spoken in Papua New Guinea, 12% of the world's total languages, which indicates the tremendous diversity and cultural groups present within the country, and also some of the challenges of uniting such a divided group when there are so many cultures and indigenous heritages is at play. Right below it, you can also see religion. Some 94% of people that live in Papua New Guinea identify as Christian, which created an intense Christian influence on policy and regional attitudes towards people like LGBTQ plus people and women within the country itself that we'll delve in a little later. Also, you can see a very high infant mortality rate and maternal mortality rate, which are a result of substandard healthcare that we'll address in the gender section of the human rights issue. Also, lastly, on GDP, you can see that Papua New Guinea does not have a high GDP. It is quite impoverished compared to developed nations and is also quite impoverished compared to some of the larger developing economies. Yet they have a low 2.5% unemployment rate, but with pretty stagnant wages. It's not growing at the rate they would want it to, especially if you consider a developing economy. You can also see the changes in GDP growth rate, which indicates a tumultuous economy and lack of regional stability, which can only amplify anti-immigrant attitudes if they were to exist. Delving into historical background, it's the second largest island in the world. It was divided between Germany and the UK. That UK half was transferred to Australia, which created some of the strong regional ties that we see now with Australia sending its refugees that they turn away, quote-unquote, boat people to Manus Island in Papua New Guinea up until November of last year, which has created tremendous Australian influence on policy and regional attitudes similar to what we discussed before. I isolated three human rights issues. The first is gender-related violence. There's three main facets of this. The first is domestic violence. There's been some high-profile people who were killed, including a high-profile journalist who was beaten to death, and people are suspected domestic violence, but the police refuse to investigate, which indicates a larger trend of authorities failing to investigate issues involving women, because police often take bribes in order, or they consider them like payments, but they're really bribes in order to investigate a certain issue because they want to be paid up front in case it's not fruitful. Also, women deal with sorcery allegations and subsequent killings. In 2017, a 6-year-old girl was burned and cut. 4 years earlier, her mother was publicly burned. And in 2016, a family of 4 was all killed over sorcery allegations. Lastly, in the gender violence category, there's severe lack of healthcare resources for women, which has caused a high maternal mortality rate. And in addition, abortion is illegal and is actually prosecuted, which means that there's a lot of unsafe pregnancies that are carried out. Secondly, I want to talk about refugee violence. Up until November of 2017, refugees were housed on Manus Island. These were male refugees that were attempting to get into Australia. On this island, there were significant crime and harassment concerns. And after they were released, Australia cut healthcare funding for them. Amnesty International listed a bunch of the things that they were missing out on, but specifically, mental health issues are incredibly bad for those who are seeking asylum in Australia because they're fleeing such intense persecution and violence that the lack of funding for that has created heightened risk of suicide and depression and is a significant human rights issue on Papua New Guinea, even if it is not directly the result of Papua New Guinean policies. Lastly, I want to address anti-LGBTQ plus violence, which is the result of these strong Christian attitudes within the country that have caused the stigmatization and persecution of LGBTQ plus folk. Sodomy is technically illegal. However, it is not frequently prosecuted, but it just creates this chilling effect across the country. This is interesting because a lot of indigenous tribes actually either encourage or practice homosexuality, including pedophilic homosexuality, which obviously not a great thing, but is something that exists, but something that the government doesn't. The prime minister of Papua New Guinea, in fact, said that the country is not ready to accept LGBTQ plus folks, which is a significant human rights issue, but it's something that it seems that the government is at least acknowledging, but is not taking tangible steps to resolve. In current news, a lot of these current news facts are related to refugees, as that is what most of the international world is talking about. However, there's some criminal justice reforms issue that is related to what I was talking about with police accepting money to attempt to investigate crimes, which has created things like toddlers in prison or simply lack of resources because the authorities are so corrupt that they don't want to release people because they fear they will not get paid. On the images tab, I selected 3 images. The first is of a police officer with a tear gas cannon overlooking a gathering of protesters at a football game or soccer. This is indicative of sort of the large role that militarized police is in the society following attempts at unrest. At the bottom, you can see a victim of domestic violence with a head covering, as I talked about in the lack of domestic violence prosecution. And here's a photo from when Manus Island was still open of the refugees. Non-governmental organizations in Papua New Guinea, I want to highlight Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International. Last Friday, I'm saying this on May 17th of 2018, so May 10th and May 11th, Amnesty International released a big report on human rights issues within the country of Papua New Guinea that I drew a lot about, and it's specifically about continuing refugee issues and gender violence within the borders of Papua New Guinea. So at the end of the day, I gave a C to Papua New Guinea because there are still some very large structural issues with human rights, specifically gender violence and refugee violence. However, the government seems to at least be acknowledging these factors and attempting to move past them, which is why they do not deserve a D or an F grade, because it is not systemic, but rather simply struggles that they must overcome. Thank you for listening.